How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to the episode 5 of our training series based on this book right here, From Reaction to Reputation, Rookie's Correctional Officer's Guide to Discretion, Authority, and Earning Command Presence. If you haven't, I would definitely recommend you watch the first 4 videos that we've put together on this. It was an introduction, and then we worked from reactionary to the shift, and then started talking about forming that reputation. Today will be episode or training class 5, and this is going to be about the spectrum of growth. So this is the phases that you go through when you are transitioning. But before we do that, Russ, you mind introducing yourself, please?
Good morning, Anthony. How are you doing this morning?
Good, sir.
So I'm Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I'm also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work for a local county jail and a local probation department. I'm also the founder of Keepers of Chaos, and that's Chaos with a K on Facebook. And basically, we provide support, training, content, mentorship, and everything else to anyone who works in corrections, not just the people with badges. And I'm here early this morning, enjoying my coffee and just getting ready to chop it up with Anthony here with regards to this subject matter.
Yes. And now, guys, remember, guys, as we're doing this training, we want people to realize that this isn't a switch. It's a shift. So again, we're going to talk about the spectrum of growth. And the transition statement here is nobody wakes up seasoned. Experience isn't measured in time. It's measured in transformation. In corrections, we often talk about officers in binaries. You're either green or seasoned. You're firm or too soft. You're ready for the floor or not cut out for this. But none of these assessments account for what's really happening. Every officer is in motion. They're evolving, shifting, learning, sometimes quietly, sometimes awkwardly, but always becoming. The problem is most facilities don't explain that this journey exists. That's why we're doing these videos. So rookies think they're either doing it right or doing it wrong because they live on the extremes. And senior staff forget that what looks like over-enforcement today might become discretion tomorrow. Correctional development is not a moment of arrival. It's a spectrum of growth. And everyone behind the walls is somewhere on it, whether they realize it or not. Okay, so we want to first go into understanding the spectrum. And like we usually do, guys, we're going to read through a little something, and then we are going to go ahead and answer some questions that have already been written out for us. So first, we're going to start by understanding the spectrum. So growth in corrections isn't linear. It doesn't look like a promotion chart or a clean checklist. It looks like a trial, error, reflection. So remember that, trial, error, reflection. A step forward, a step back, then a leap in awareness that changes everything. Officers don't become good because the calendar says they should. They become good because enough friction has revealed who they are under pressure, and enough mentorship has shown them how to use that knowledge. So let's walk through the journey. So Russ, first question. Can you think of a moment early in your career when you thought you had it, only to realize you were still deep in the learning process, and what changed after that realization?
I kind of always, subscribed to the idea that, I was always on a pathway. I never thought there was a point at which I was finished. I always thought that there was, always something more to come. Having said that, were there times where I was, overconfident? Were there times that, maybe I didn't have things in hand as much as I thought I did? Absolutely, because we're human, we're subject, to sometimes just being flawed in not just in what our assessments are, but what our actions are. I think that there was one particular, I'll never forget. It was a Christmas morning, and things were just kind of not looking right. And I thought, you know what, we'll go and we'll fix this. After the meal gets done, and it just didn't wait. It was an absolute riot. I always called it the Christmas Day riot, and it was my belief and my assessment that what was wrong on the yard could be fixed, and it wouldn't even wait. And so that was kind of like a wake up call in that regard. In the end, could I've actually done anything more? Probably not, because it was gonna pop off right then and there anyway. But there's many of those times, and we just have to reassess, take things under advisement, work to polish our skills, and know that process is never going to end. There's never a point where we are going to be a finished product. Is there a point where we're going to be, a competent correctional officer? Absolutely. But the process never ends. Well, at least it shouldn't. I see a lot of people out there. I think the biggest mistake they make is they decide that, okay, I've learned everything I've learned. I need to learn, and now I have the seniority I need to get the easiest job that I possibly can have. And they actually, kind of slide back. They're no longer learning. They're just, on a maintenance phase towards doing things that no longer challenge them. And that tends to be pretty rampant, I think, throughout corrections.
I agree with you, Russ, 100%. I mean, time in doesn't always equate to you knowing the profession the best. I like this one saying here. It looks like trial, error, reflection. So there's a step forward, a step back, and then there's a leap of awareness that changes everything. And to be honest with you, when I came into corrections, I was very open to learning. I'm still open to learning. I find myself reflecting all the time. These shows that we put together are discussions. We give out advice, we reflect on the advice, and then we go try to apply it, still reflect, and we're constantly always growing. I agree. Like, if you're someone who believes that time in equates to knowledge, equates to just knowing the profession and not having to learn anymore because you've already done 20 years or 25 years, man, Russ had given us a story a while back where he learned something on his last day right before retiring. And we're learning stuff every day. And Russ has been long since retired. Joe has been retired, now moved on to another career related to corrections, but no longer with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. So this corrections is about continually learning. And I think it's just good to get that information out there, that you may have 20, 25 years. And yes, that you deserve respect for that. Don't get me wrong, but don't think that on 20 years that you can sit back and just stop learning. You're learning every day. All right. So now we got phase one. This is the reactionary coach. So we touched on this, but now we're going to go a little bit more deeper. This is the fire first learner. This is the launch pad, the beginning, the loudest stage internally and externally. The officer is adrenaline fueled and protocol bound. We talked about this. Every action fuels high stakes. Every non-compliance feels personal. Every order is a test of their identity. They speak loudly, move stiffly. They write everything. And deep down, they're scared because they don't yet know if they belong. But here's the key. This isn't dysfunction. It's formation. They're clinging to policy not to dominate, but to survive. They haven't built presence yet, so they borrow authority from enforcement. And while it may look clumsy to outsiders, this is how confidence starts. They're learning to stand, and standing takes repetition. What they need here isn't shame, it's structure. And a quiet voice saying, keep going. You're not supposed to have it figured out just yet. So, Russ, what does healthy support look like for someone in this early reactionary phase? And what mistakes do we often make when trying to guide them?
Oh, That's such a huge question. I think that when I started, it was a matter of just being around the older officers, listening to some of their experiences, getting to see how they acted and reacted to things going on around them, and then trying to find a way for me to fit in to add my little bit of effort, not really knowledge at that point, except for what you've learned in the academy, and then trying to become where you function inside that environment. And so there's like a lot of points at which you kind of are just more of a functionary. You show up and your sergeant tells you, hey, go help feed breakfast. And so you go do that and you come back, and then maybe they tell you, hey, you're going to be out on the yard today for a little while. And you're kind of like going and doing things, but you don't really understand necessarily what your true function is. And then at some point you start moving forward because you start getting involved in things. Things start to happen around you. Hopefully at some point you start to make an impact. And then at some point you start to become more autonomous. And it's that point at which you start to become autonomous and you start to act on your own. You start to take initiative and you start to, design and make your own plays, so to speak. And that's the point at which, real growth is starting to occur. I'll never forget, probably the point at which I actually took some action and got things going. Is there was one particular incident out on the West Block yard, and I can't really call it an incident because nothing was actually happening, except I was walking by these two guys, and it was the first time I ever felt that electric shock of the hair standing on the back of my neck. And one was just handing a sandwich to the other guy, and I was like, I just knew, and man, I grabbed that away from them, and told them to keep their hands where I could see it, and I could feel that there was something in there, and it was a syringe. And I think that was the first point at which I had acted on my own to get something accomplished in a manner that kind of moved safety and security forward. And so that's what we want to see from people. Some people never get to that point. They're always, a placeholder, and placeholders just don't get it done.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we did videos like this because we're showing not just the rookie, but we're showing the senior staff, the supervisors, that there's progress here. That it's good for us to have put a name to this because now people understand more of what the rookie's going through, because I think we all go through this. I don't think this is something that we discovered. It's something we put a name on. That's all we did. And I think the reactionary part is key because it should force the rookie to react in a way that starts to encourage them to use their authority. So we talked about them chasing conflict, and it's a very controlled effort, but they're embracing the role of what it takes to be a correctional officer, what it takes to tell someone no and have to stand by that no, have to reinforce that no, because you will get challenged. If it's not directly, it's indirectly. Maybe I won't challenge no as an inmate, but I'll challenge your reasoning behind it. And I also want to mention for the senior staff and the supervisors, the reason why it's extremely important for you to understand this process that we're teaching is you got to meet the rookie on their grounds, not on where you are now. And I've seen that. I have seen people that, are trying to make an effort to really train the rookie, but they're training the rookie without providing anything foundational. So they're teaching the rookies certain things that the rookie's not ready for. And you don't want to do that because, again, you have to understand where the rookie is in that moment. And then that may even require you yourself to step back. When I was training, when I was an officer and I had to train another officer on the unit that was new, I had to change my ways. to meet where the rookie was at, which means that if I ran a unit and I had a more evolved presence or a more evolved way of handling things, I would tell the inmates that day, hey, I'm working with someone new, because they know, inmates know you're working with someone new, so you're not putting it out there. And I would tell them, be on your P's and Q's, because if they're going to come at you and the rookies are going to start writing you, I'm going to support it if the charge makes sense, because this is the rookie's time to learn. But I also know it's the time for inmates also to try to test. So I would be very connected to that rookie's level. And even if I dealt with the inmate, and inmate wasn't a concern, well, if the rookie wrote you up, you are now, because I'm not going to sit there and now try to navigate what the rookie needs based on what how I run things. I'm going to do it based on where we're at now. That's why it's good that we put a label on this. Does that make sense, Russ?
Yeah, absolutely. You get in there and you just, you have to be intentional with what you're doing. I don't think that, any rookie is well served by just winging it, although there is a place and a time and perhaps even a PowerPoint on that somewhere. But mostly, we have to figure out ways to bring them along. I kind of sometimes, liken it to, back when I used to train hunting dogs. You had to put them into situations and see how they did and make corrections, and try and get them to understand what it is that they're doing. And as a puppy, they're not ready for the big tasks yet. They're not ready to go out there completely on their own, unsupervised, and run the predator down, if you will.
Yeah. And guys, it's like trying to teach someone advanced physics when they haven't taken the initial earth science course yet, or whatever the first course would be. Okay, so now we're going to go to phase 2. So the first part was reactionary. This is more procedural. So this is where they try to become that policy technician. Here, the chaos starts to settle. The officer knows where things are, how to check rosters, how to fill out logs. They're more comfortable, but still rigid. They've stopped overreacting to everything, but they still rely heavily on systems. They ask, where's that policy? Is this logged correctly? What's the directive for this? They enforce well, but they don't yet adapt well. They're reliable, but not yet flexible. This is the compliance phase. It's safer, but not smoother. And it still leaves the officer vulnerable in gray area situations. But that's okay, because this is the part of the process where they begin trusting the job. And slowly, they start trusting themselves. Russ, why do some officers get stuck in this procedural phase? And how can leadership help move them towards more adaptive thinking?
I think that's always really tough to answer when we talk about, underlying things that cause people to get stuck in those phases. I think that the thing that we should point to most often in that, regardless of whether it's true or not, is the training. And, who are we presenting to them to model after? I think that we have to, make sure that we get through to them on the training, that we put them into, stressful situations so that they become, stress inoculated in the right way, not in the complacent way. And that they have a chance then to, act and, learn something either through failure or through success. Because there's things on both sides of those. I learned equal from, both and each, as it were. But that's just where we have to put them. That's where we have to keep them. Not everybody is going to be the most adaptive thinker. The person, who can, get inside every inmate's head and make the huge play and stuff. Some people we're just going to have to understand, are going to be, good or even great officers, but they're only going to, ever reach a certain point. But that doesn't mean that their journey stops, just because they're not going to get to where someone else is. And so we just have to be able to provide, good training, not stuff on a PowerPoint, not stuff, where we're, checking the boxes to make sure, okay, now you've done bloodborne pathogens for the third time, and then expecting that counts as training. It may be necessary, it may be even life saving, but there's a lot of other things out there that we need to put the young pups onto.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people may get stuck in this phase because they feel safe. I mean, at the very beginning, you're reacting, but you're also leaning on policies, rules, so the decisions are pretty much made for you. Even here, when you're starting to really learn policy, you're starting to understand how things work. This is great foundational knowledge, but again, the decisions are made for you. So this is really just an introduction of what you're going to kind of advance your decision-making model from. You got to have trust in what you're trying to enforce. You got to have trust in the rules, the policies. And then the next step is, okay, well, this is already written for you. Go out there and go enforce it. And that's great, because then you start trusting yourself in the application of it all. So this is great. But again, it becomes very simple when the decisions are made for you. And if something is wrong, you don't get the responsibility of that decision. So a lot of people may feel safe at this point because, okay, I made a decision, but the decision is clearly written in policy. And we discussed this in the past, but again, I used to idolize officers that can memorize policy, but then I also saw that there were some officers that memorized policy, but it was a crutch for them. I mean, they started to scramble when things didn't always fit in so nicely. So I think, again, the reason why people may stay here is because it's safe. And again, if you're a supervisor or a peer and you're looking in and you're seeing that, there's a balance here in how you want to teach them policy and procedure, but you also want to kind of teach them maybe at the same time, some level of discretion when required, because I do see people that, when they're the senior officer, Russ, or when they're the supervisor, they may say, you better know policy to a T. And, man, if you stray off from that, you're going to get written up. You're going to lose your job, cover your own ass. And that adds fear, when we know deep down inside that we're making decisions all the time in an effort to bring policy back, to where we need it to be less chaotic. So we have to be very wary if we're going to teach the rookies out there how we, balance the importance of policy, but opening the door for the need for discretion. I don't want officers to stay here and feel so safe that they could, for the rest of their career, defer responsibility under the guise of, memorizing policy and being that guru. Yeah, that's great. But, in the end, you have to be able to know that not everything's going to fit perfectly into that procedure to meet that policy. So what do you do then? All right, so then I got the observational phase. So this is phase 3. This is the quiet watcher. The third phase is subtle and internal. This is when the rookie becomes a student of presence. They watch the veterans. They notice how some officers walk into a unit and the air changes, but not from fear. They see how a calm word has more impact than a loud one. They observe how the tier seems to move differently under certain people's shifts, and it sparks questions. Why did that work? Why didn't they raise their voice? Why do people listen to them? And this is where self-awareness takes root. They begin experimenting. They say less. They observe more. They adjust their tone. They let silence speak first. They're still mimicking, but it's no longer about copying authority. It's about developing their own version of it. And this is where identity begins to emerge. Now, Russ, can you recall a moment? Sorry, that's the right question. Can you recall a moment where you watched someone handle a situation with unexpected skill and it reshaped how you thought about presence?
Yeah, I'd say like every day. I think one of the greatest things about having a chance to supervise people is, they would just constantly surprise you, and, not because you had doubt in them, but kind of like on the opposite end, you just like you knew that, that they had, uh, time, time in the department, time in the unit, and experience and things like that. And yet, they handle something, so great that it's above and beyond where you would, even expect their level to be. So those are things that, I think we see all the time, especially, I think, when rookies get to that real growth phase, where they're, really first starting to figure things out and understand what their role in things is, but more importantly, that they understand, what's outside them, and how it all kind of interlaces together. So, I had this one, rookie with me at the time, and we were just going through, and we were, getting a little bit of contraband here and there, and I made a stop at a place and got myself a nice big huge ball of dope, and so that was really cool. And then, right after I was done off of that, I said, when you find something like this, you never stop searching in that spot. And instantly, we were like, I mean, within 2 feet, there's like 5 gallons of Pruno. And you know what? He really took that to heart. And after that, he was always coming up with things, and you would just send him out there, and he's just kind of like, and next thing you know, he's bringing you back some contraband. And it was just like, what a great young pup he became. And so, but there's, a jillion stories like that out there. You see people rise to the occasion all the time in corrections. And that's what we want to, point them toward. That's where we want to keep their focus at. I think it's a shame I see too many times where, the training and the opportunity just isn't there. We just operate at this level where, hey, no, you're a rookie. Go somewhere else. We're going to handle this. So, but I think that's becoming less, maybe in some areas, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, and guys, I want to mention, you kind of, when you start to move up or go to different positions laterally, you kind of go through this restart. You kind of have a little bit more experience you're leaning on. But even when I became a sergeant, I was like kind of like a rookie all over again to some extent. And then when I crossed into administration, I felt like a rookie again. When I went to different facilities, because I've worked at 5 or 6 prisons at this point, I felt like a rookie again. So I do look around to see how things work, and yes, evaluated experience. So when you're watching someone maneuver and they could seem to do things with minimal effort, that's probably because their experience, whether it's time in, but I think more so evaluated experience, is recognized and respected. So there's a lot of things that happen with a lot less effort based on the person's reputation. And that's kind of where we're at now and what we are trying to bring in this lesson. And again, everything that's being taught in this lesson is covered in this book right here, From Reaction to Reputation, because a lot of the stuff that hasn't been said in that moment has already been said before. It's just now the person is leading through reputation. I actually have another podcast I'm doing right now called Lessons Unlocked. You can find it on any podcast, Spotify, whatever, iHeart. And I did a show yesterday on expectation and how basically that is what you lean towards. You lean towards expectation. I expect something from you. You expect something from me. And somewhere along the line, we meet in the middle. And that's where professional growth is. So I think for anyone watching this, you could be seeing someone react a little bit with what you may seem or what you may feel is less effort. But in the end, they've already put the effort, because that's going to be you one day. One day you're going to be in that position, and you're going to do a nod, and people are going to respect the nod, and rookie's going to be watching you like, man, how did you do that? And it's funny because I think I got this from John Maxwell, but sometimes someone will look at someone that they admire and they'll say, well, how do I get to that? How do I get to be that Russ or Ganji or Joe? And the funny thing is the real answer is not about how you get to that, but are you willing to do the things that we did to get to that? Because that's what speaks loudly when you don't, see it. It's spoken in the background. All right. That makes sense, right, Russ?
Yeah, I think I don't know if anyone's ever read my article. It's out there in a lot of places about finding contraband. That was the one thing that kind of really got me started. And I would see all these guys, especially like from ISU and stuff, and they'd come in and they'd be turning some stuff over, and boom, contraband. I was like, man, how do they do that? And I just began modeling myself, and then lo and behold, at some point I had a few successes, and started looking at things a little bit differently. Had some people clue me in on some things, figured some things out myself, and pretty soon, all of a sudden, other people are coming to me and say, how do you do what you do? And it's just part of the learning process. And part of the learning process, though, is you can't become a master until you teach it back to someone else. And so that's one thing that I think we should all seek to do. Whatever it is that we're doing and doing well, we need to teach it back and down to other people.
All right. So now we get to the deliberate operator. So this is phase 4. This is where things become a little bit more strategic. So now the officer is no longer checking boxes. They're reading the room. They developed emotional range. They no longer feel the need to win every moment. Instead, they begin to ask, what does this situation need? Does this require action or awareness? Can presence alone correct this? I want to read that one more time because this is really important. What does this situation need? Does this require action or awareness? And can presence alone correct this? This plays out when you want to report something versus documenting it. This plays out when you're becoming less reactionary now. Like maybe it is about me just observing and holding back. But this is where it's strategic risk. This is where you truly start to lean on discretionary effort. So again, they stop writing charges automatically. They start using timing, tone, and tactics. This is where discretion becomes a tool, not a theory. They're no longer saying, I followed policy. They're saying, I followed policy, but I chose how. I followed policy, but I chose how. Their voice is calmer. Their posture is grounded. Their judgment is respected. They've become not just a doer, but a decider. Now, Russ, the question here is, why is strategic discretion so difficult to teach, and what helped you develop it personally?
I think that it's hard because what you have is trial and error, and we don't want to introduce error into too many things inside any particular unit that we're working, because that can bring on and lead to cascading effects that we just don't want to have to deal with. So I think that understanding, okay, I'm going to act in a discretionary manner, and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, rather than let what the automatic process is. Complete adherence to to policy and procedure. Well, policy and procedure is also designed to give us some discretion, and so when we're early on in our careers, we tend to let policy and procedure kind of dictate everything, or at least we should, or there's some point where maybe there's some little wiggle room for discretionary decision making, but we just have to understand what it's going to mean by showing discretion at this point. Are we really actually doing a kindness to the inmate by giving him a break because we have the power to do that, or are we setting him up for future failure? Or are we being leveraged and manipulated to let someone out of it that's never going to learn? And so being able to balance and, take all of those things into account at one time is something that, a rookie is not equipped to do. But it is something that they will have to do at some point.
Yeah, and Russ, I love what you said. The discretion is hard to teach because you're taking on responsibility or ownership of a choice, and that's tough because some people also may not be ready for that choice. And I like what Russ said too, where if I'm your peer or I'm a supervisor and I'm trying to teach you discretion, there could be a chance where some of the learning you get will be from failing or making the wrong choice. Again, as long as it could be fixed, I may want you to go through that, because I like that thing where it says I'll follow policy, but how? How is within the procedure. And guys, we already know if you work in corrections, these policies, these procedures, they're developed in ideal settings, and I get it. They got to provide some level of foundation to branch off from, but you're not working in ideal situations. So, that procedure is going to have to vary. And I think the reason, again, why it becomes so hard is because now you're also translating ownership into this profession and into your chosen career. And you also have to, there's a balance here too, because I think some people may feel safe in having the choices made for them because they're so concerned of the consequences and being judged by the consequences, even at the very beginning. Am I going to be seen as too soft, or am I going to lose my job? I mean, so now you get someone who's trying to teach you discretion and they may even say risk. And it's like, well, I don't want risk. They're not in corrections, risk aversive. Yeah, but the problem is there is always going to be strategic risk. That's what corrections is about. So it's not like you're making decisions without any strength in your foundation. No, you're making decisions as you evolve. So there will be a point where I think this is the phase where you're introduced to some level of discretion in your application, because this may be the point where you're starting to evolve into that. So again, I'm not telling you to utilize discretion at the very beginning when you're not ready for it, but this gets to be a point now where you're starting to cross in, and somewhere along the line, you're going to have to, especially if you're a senior officer or supervisor trying to train this rookie, you're going to have to introduce them to discretion, because if you don't, you are going to get someone who will follow policy right into hell, or the procedure right into hell. Does that make sense, Russ?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. So now
that's part and parcel. That's what we see all the time.
All right. So now we're going to go to phase 5, which is stabilizing presence, the cultural anchor. And it was funny. I want to mention something. I posted that this video was coming up, and somewhere along the line, cultural anchor came up, and I posted this on this one correctional officer group. They are extremely bitter. It was just attacks on being soft and all this other stuff. And it's like, cultural anchor? Is there any, where's your context of being soft? Some of these stuff that you post up, people don't even watch the video. They close themselves off. They make these crazy assumptions that turn out to be very offensive. And then you wind up just having to hold yourself back because you don't want to get caught up into that negative energy. So I usually say, well, guys, if that's what you think without watching the material, then you guys can go ahead and think that, because at this point here, I'm not really that invested in what people like you may think of my material or of me as an individual, because I do relate. I do identify with the material I provided. So does Russ, and so does Joe. Okay, so stabilizing presence, the cultural anchor. So by now, something powerful has happened. The officer walks onto the tier and things settle. Not because people fear them, but because people know what they bring. Stability. They don't bark orders. They rarely escalate. They command through reputation, not repetition. Inmates adjust around them because they trust the consistency. Other staff mirror them because they recognize influence when they see it. Supervisors lean on them because they quiet chaos. They become an anchor, not because they're perfect, but because they're predictable in the best way. This is the moment when leadership happens without anyone needing to say a word. Russ, here's a question for you. What's the difference between being respected for your position versus being respected for your presence? And how can officers earn the latter?
So this is one of those things that you have to look at the difference between that which is titular, titled, as it were, which means correctional officer, sergeant, whatever, and the person who inhabits that title. So if you look toward what the person is all about that inhabits the title, hopefully they are a proficient individual. They know what they're doing. They've taken responsibility and action upon themselves, and that's when you're looking at the person acting in the capacity that he inhabits, and that's the best way I know to put it. Otherwise, you're just looking at, okay, so an officer is an officer with the authority of X, Y, or Z. Some people are much better at inhabiting that than others, and of projecting their range of influence, projecting their range of authority, and projecting their influence and leadership.
Yeah, spot on, Russ. I think sometimes when rookies, if they're paired with someone who is aggressive in their authority, the rookie officer may believe that that's how you have to be, and then wind up, just draining their energy really quick. I think if they're trained next to someone who's too soft, it becomes very uncomfortable. So this right here with position versus being respected for your presence. Presence is mattered. Presence is how you develop within the middle of those extremes. So again, we determined the middle would be somewhere between being assertive and professionally empathetic. But yes, and how do officers earn the ladder of respect? I love the word consistency, because you're going to be challenged throughout these phases. So you have to reinforce your ground, and that's the battle. Is once you find that, you got to stand behind it. Okay, so how officers move through the spectrum. Officers don't progress just by working more shifts. They progress when key support are in place. So let's break this down. Okay, so the first thing I got, Russ, is exposure to varied situations. Growth comes from friction, not just during emergencies, but during calm. So rookies need to experience the manipulation of silence, the anxiety of downtime, and the ambiguity of small defiance, because gray is where growth lives. Now, Russ, how can supervisors create safe learning opportunities in the gray areas without compromising safety or consistency?
Oh. So I think like sometimes we when we talk about policy and procedure and things that don't necessarily exist within those, because you can't just write policy or procedures that cover everything. To do so, you would make it so unwieldy that no one could ever know it all. And you would come up with, gimmicks of things that actually wouldn't work in exigent situations. So I think that, some people may view things as gray that really aren't gray. They're just discretionary. It's not that they're partially bad or they're partially good, and so they end up being gray. It's that they're unaddressed. And so we have to leave the addressing of those things up to people who, hopefully are, really proficient in whatever it is that they've been titled into, whether it's a officer, whether it's a sergeant, any of those things. And, they can take and wrangle those things into things that, comply and comport with policy, but also, wrangle out, because there may be actually no policy or procedure that actually buttresses that, but they can still wrangle things out in a manner that's safe, and effective, and does not make things worse. Because, if we were to talk about doctors and their Hippocratic oath, first, do no harm, is an important facet, to some of the things that we may take on, that, really aren't clear as to, what the proper thing should be. I know I talked way in circles around that, but I think I made sense.
No, you did. I wanted to mention something too when it comes to the ones doing the training. Sometimes when you put someone next to a rookie, sometimes we do look for people that know policy and procedure to a T, and then we may not understand. Well, maybe they know it because it's a crutch. Sometimes when you work with somebody who utilizes policy and procedure as a crutch, they may not be the best person to train that rookie, because right now we're trying to introduce discretion. So with that said, there's a fine balance of knowing policy and procedure, but also how to maneuver within policy and procedure. Now, with that said, there are some people that if I am training Russ, it's good for me to really understand the job, the dynamic, the use of discretion, because I am going to want to empower Russ to make decisions. But I also have to have not just confidence in Russ, but I also have to have confidence in myself that I know the job well enough to address any concerns that can come out of Russ's decision making. I mean, I'm thinking of it even as just as a teacher, where, a teacher that's good at math can figure out what the problem is in the process or in the progress to help address someone figuring out a math problem that is a formula, where for if I only know surface stuff, at the end of the day, if I tell Russ, hey, what's 2 + 2? And Russ comes back and tells me 5, I only know that the answer is 4. I don't know why the answer is 4. I just know the answer is 4. So all I do is correct Russ and say the answer is 4. But I really haven't done anything for Russ in the long run. I just correct Russ. But if I'm someone that has experience, if I'm someone that knows the job, I know the formula. I know every step of the formula. So when Russ tells me 2 + 2 is 5, I don't just tell Russ, hey, Russ, it's not 5, it's 4. But let me show you how we get to 4. But first, can you show me how you got to 5? And then because I understand the process and I understand where Russ needs to be, I'm able to correct him or work with him from a way that he's able to understand it. But here's the cool thing. Once you teach someone the formula, which I equate to effort, and not just the outcome, they start to learn. And now they start to be able to provide that in other areas that are not just so specific to anything that equals the number 4. Does that make sense, Russ?
Yeah, I mean, we have to do things within those confines, in order to clear things up for people. We don't want people laboring under their own misapprehensions, least of all rookies.
Now let me get to number 2 on this, because there's 4. So I have oh wait, hold on. Let me fix that. I have constructive, uncomfortable feedback. Not just you're doing great. Rookies, they need to hear, what would you do differently next time? Here's what you missed and why it matters. You escalated too soon. Let's talk about a better entry point. Feedback should challenge without crushing. So, Russ, what's an example of powerful feedback you received that stuck with you, and how was it delivered?
Oh, positive or negative?
Well, I mean, is feedback really negative if you can grow from it?
No, it's not negative in that sense, but it may be negative about someone's perception of what you did. It may, in fact, be negative, from the viewpoint of, yes, you did do something that was, not copacetic, as it were. Or it could be, something positive where you really took things in a different light from that one on. If I was going to give a real world example of it, I had this great lieutenant that I worked for at San Quentin, Don Graham. And boy, one day somebody had given an inmate a clipboard, and for them to write something, and it had some like metal on it, which was uncool. Somebody's bad there, not my bad. And when they got the clipboard back, all of the metal hoops over it were missing, and Graham was just like, can you get this back? And I went to work, and I set things up so people saw some searches were going on, so some other people would drop the contraband. And in like 5 minutes, I found it inside one of the cardboard lunch boxes that we had that somebody had abandoned, but it was going to be used for wrong purposes no matter what. And I went in there, and I triumphantly handed it over to the lieutenant, and he says, "That's why I picked you to do this." And then that's all he really said to me. And from that moment on, I always felt like I had to live up to that. And I was just, on fire. So I think that particular moment in my career, because it's, a kind of a key memory now, really played a role in my development. And I think that we have to, use things like that and leverage them to help people get there. Now, sometimes it may have to be negative, but in this case, I chose a positive.
No, I think that's great. And I think, negativity could also be subjective. I mean, sometimes you got these rookies that are not willing to learn. So when you go to give them advice, they take it as judgment, or they feel they have to impress. So when you give them advice, they take it as, oh my God, I'm not good enough. And they put this pressure on themselves to be perfect when no one's expecting them to be. Just, let's work on this together. So I think it's really also on how the person receives the feedback as well. And when we say constructive, tone really matters, because the person at this phase is very vulnerable. So you want to make sure that when you do provide them with some level of feedback, that maybe you also work on the positive first, so they know they're going in the right direction, because what you say first matters. It's the initial impression. If I say something negative and then go off into 4 things positive, I really haven't heard you say anything positive. I'm sticking to the negative. So if you start with something positive, then I'm willing to go ahead and work with the negative, because now I have a stronger foundation to lean from. And as for me, I listen to everything. Now in the position I'm in now, I find I'm the one that gives more feedback because of my position, even though I still get feedback. Trust me, I usually provide more. So the one thing I tend to do is I know that my position sometimes will speak before I do, especially with rookies. And I try to level the playing ground if I'm trying to provide them advice, where I want them to actually see the advice and not fear the position the person's given, the person that may be given the advice. So even if I may, sometimes I may see something wrong, but because of my position, I'm not the best person to give the advice. I may give it to a sergeant or a peer or the training department, because I know sometimes, people see the position, and the position could put blinders onto the advice, where the person may be more concerned that the advice is really them getting in trouble. And it's like, if you're not getting in trouble, I'm just trying to give you some advice. So sometimes you may know it, but you may not be the best person to deliver it. Does that make sense, Russ?
Oh, 100%, 100%. There's good ways and better ways to deliver both bad news and good news.
There you go. Now I got number 3 is emotional permission to fail forward. They need to be told you're supposed. Right, so again, this goes with rookies again. Emotional permission to fail forward. They need to be told you're supposed to mess some of this up. Just make sure you learn something every time you do. And that sounds scary, but that's the truth. And that removes shame and builds some level of ownership. That's the key. Russ, how can giving someone emotional permission to fail actually lead to greater accountability and growth?
I think we can't expect perfection. We try and get there in a way that doesn't negatively impact safety and security. I was never perfect. I don't think the people that trained me, I don't think that they were perfect, and the people that I trained were not perfect. Uh, I think we have to, have people into a position where they can make mistakes, where they can, fail, but you know what, come back and play on the field the next day, as it were, because that's the nature of what we do. So, if we're out there, telling people, oh, well, now you've failed. Well, yeah, everyone does, especially at corrections, and even if your game is solid, there's times where you're just going to come up short, no matter who you are. So I think putting it in people's heads that hey, you know what, we're going to go and we're going to try and eke out the best outcome we can, but no outcome that we have can ever be optimum, because we start from a failed state to begin with. The population of inmates that we have, and even the system that we have, none of them are perfect. The system isn't perfect, and so all we can do is try and be the best that we can be, and try and raise them up. Not necessarily the inmates, because that may or may not be possible, but certainly the system and what we have to work with, and the outcomes that we seek to impact.
Yeah, and guys, when you go into a situation, eventually your reputation will do this for you, but you got to stabilize the chaos. So, the failure or giving someone emotional permission to fail also opens up the door to full ownership, because ownership of a decision on the front end is one thing. Ownership of its consequences is something else. So if you're going to try to, I don't know, introduce this person to a perfect world where, everything you do has to be by the book because we expect perfection, then when they do make a mistake, it's going to be devastating. They are going to hesitate when when they have to make another decision eventually, or they're just going to be afraid in general to make any decision. What we want are people to make decisions, to lean into the chaos and help us stabilize. The last thing we want it for people to be so afraid to make a decision, because they're more concerned about the consequence from our side and getting something wrong. Think about that. Some people aren't afraid to risk their lives. They'll go in and do what has to be done. They made that promise. Sometimes their greater fear is getting in trouble, because I now have to make a choice and I don't feel that I'm going to be supported. So the other benefit of this too is also, like I love what Russ said, when you're letting them know that we're not expecting perfection, that you're going into situations that aren't perfect to begin with. This kind of lets them know that, hey, your job is to stabilize, so we need you to make effort towards that. And then I also have long-term mentorship. So they need more than a field trainer. They need a coach, someone who says, well, I used to overreact too, or here's how I found my calm, or let me explain how I knew when to act and when not to. I love that. And Russ, what's the difference between training and mentorship, and why does mentorship have longer lasting impact? Kind of like
so. Yeah. So, training is that which, happens, formally, whether on the ranges or in a classroom. Mentorship is personal advice about the application of that which we're trained for. And it's additional training that's either not well suited or not well taught within the confines of a classroom. It's that distinct one-on-one personal relationship that helps you actually take and digest what you've learned so far, be it in the classroom or out on the ranges, the galleries, the tiers, whatever we're calling them these days. And in a way, that give you a better chance to apply training without having to wait for all of the experiences to come along so that you learn all of this stuff. That person that's a mentor is actually, shortcutting you through things because, actually development is something that can't wait, although it often does in corrections.
And guys, mentorship to me is also very personal. I think there's value in the exchange itself. You can't force someone to be a mentor, and you can't force someone to take on a mentor. I think it's a relationship that's developed where both parties accept that dynamic. Because I like Russ said, a mentorship is foundational, and it really does deal with the person and not the position. And that in itself could be messy. The people that I've mentored or been mentored by, they've mentored me, not the position. They've mentored me. That means they deal with me and all my flaws, just like I deal with them and all their flaws. So it is longer lasting because you're working directly with the individual, and those are the relationships that truly have the greatest impact because the person feels your presence even when they're not at work, if that makes any sense. All right, Russ, 2 last parts and we're done. We did good. We got, one last part before closing. What leadership must do to nurture the spectrum? If leadership wants to build a team of high-level correctional officers, not just policy enforcers, they must do 4 things. 1 is they must make development visible. So you got to explain the growth phases to new staff. Let them see that where they are is normal and temporary. And that's what we're doing with these videos. We labeled it, So again, reactionary, shift, and then ultimately the reputation side. And we kind of discussed that as from reactionary to having levels of expectation that are understood. You got to celebrate the transitions. Say you're not just writing everything now, you're starting to choose your interventions. That's growth. And I think that's a big key in understanding the transition is, I love what we said before, when to act, when not to act. That's where you start moving away from less reactionary to just more strategic. You want to pair people wisely. I wish this was always the case, but it's true. Mentors should be stable, not just senior. Teach rookies how to think, not just how to act. That's always been an issue right now with corrections is who's doing the training. And then you got debrief after incidences. So ask what worked, what didn't, and would you do the same thing next time? That 5-minute conversation might do more for growth than an entire training module. Now, Russ, of these 4 leadership moves, which one do you think would make the biggest difference if implemented more consistently, and why?
Take me back through them again real quick.
Yeah, so I have number 1 is make development visible. Number 2 is celebrate transitions. Number 3 is pair people wisely. And number 4 is debrief after incidents.
I think that it's got to be celebrate transitions because, to be quite frank, is pairing people wisely is just not doable. I mean, when you look at where we're at with regards to manning and staffing and the number of people that you have on any given shift. So, man. Say them again real quick.
Yeah, I got
it. Because that one just like jumped out at me because I mean in an ideal world, we would be right there.
Well, I got make development visible, celebrate transitions, pair people wisely, debrief after incidents.
I think celebrate transitions, and the reason I'll say is this is people have to have a benchmark to look at against. If you're lucky and you're good at internalizing that, good for you. I think that, I got there eventually. But I think, like knowing, hey, you know what, now you're, now you've, completed this, you're moving, up the skills ladder. We've seen and assessed what you're doing. And so much of the time, we just leave it to either chance or just like, that's just the way it's being done. And so that's just the way we're going to do it. And so I think that, bringing people along and showing them their progress is important. Because as I mentioned in that other example that I gave, my lieutenant at that point was good at bringing me along. He was good at, letting me loose off the leash, as it were, to render the result he wanted, and that became very formative for me.
All right. So for me, I mean, obviously everything I feel is of importance. You needed to perfectly have the dance. But I do got to say, Russ, I think the person next to you matters. I think like we labeled this training. So it's not just for the people going through the training, but the people next to them to say, hey, this is what you got to know. This is how you're going to have to coach people through this moment. And you're right. In the ideal setting right now, you may not be able to find these people. And that's why we're doing this training here. That's why we spend our time labeling the process, because somewhere along the line, everything we're teaching about now used to be learned through observation. You don't see it anymore because it's not there. So then me and Russ had to really go back through our heads and say, well, what are we actually learning then? And how do we translate that into a lesson? So we took what is seen on the floor that takes years to master or years to accomplish to some extent. I don't know if you ever really master it. And we made it into this book, into this lesson that we're doing now. But with that said, if you put the wrong person next to the individual, they can discourage all the progress. That's the scariest thing about working around in an environment that could be negative, because people could be disgruntled or whatever it is, and they lose accountability for each other. And, they expect more than could be given. And now the problem is you set them up on the right path and you connect them with one wrong person, and the way backwards is so much faster than the way forward. So I figure the person who's next to them matters the most, because without all this, if you have the wrong person next to the individual, the person is going to wind up leading the other person down the wrong path. And right now, the new people that are coming in, they do need some level of higher guidance. But I will say this, the development, the transitions, the reason why me and Russ labeled it is because people need to know what marks they need to hit with the new people, but also the new people need to know that there are marks to be hit, so they know they're progressing and not just doing it for no reason. Last part, Russ, is just a summary. Growth is not accidental, it's engineered. So the evolution from reaction to reputation doesn't happen because time passed. It happens because someone noticed the change, because someone said that was different and that was better. Growth doesn't happen in isolation. It happens through design, through reflection, through culture. Leadership must build a place where transformation isn't optional, it's expected, because the badge may give you a title, but only your development gives you a voice that people actually listen to. The next video we're going to do is going to be the arrival of discretion, when it finally feels safe. Basically, discretion is the quiet superpower. It doesn't come from training. It comes from presence. Hey, Russ, anything you'd like to say to close this training part off?
No, I think that's kind of, an important thing, though, just, reflecting back on that. I had a guy call me up the other day. We had worked together for quite a while, and he just kind of like thanked me, and I was like a little bit taken aback, and I guess that he had come through as a not even a rookie. He was there as a cadet, and he said, "Man, you took us all under your wing and showed us a bunch of things, and that was something that no one else ever did." And I was a little bit taken aback. It's like that's what we should be doing all the time. We should be intentional about every thing that we're doing with these rookies. And so that was pleasant to hear. And I'll just say that if you're training the rookies, be intentional, and put them on to good things and show them the way. Let them make some mistakes. Let them have some victories, and bring them along, because that's certainly what we're there to do. In addition to all of the other responsibilities and all of the other duties, that one is the one that we're going to impact what's going on in corrections far, far down the road from even when whoever you are retires.
And guys, this video hits the halfway mark. That means there's still 5 more videos to touch up on. And this is a lot, but this is the journey we all go through. And we didn't make it complicated. We labeled it. That's all we're doing. And can't wait for us to do another series on something different. But this is, again, for our rookies, but also for the senior staff, for the supervisors that will be walking next to them. All right, guys, I'll see you in for our next video, video 6. Stay safe.